Welcome, everybody, to our latest podcast. This is not a Colorado Avalanche podcast. This is a Colorado Buffaloes podcast. But Matt, I guess we're both repping the Avs. They are in the playoffs and really dominating. Aren't they 5-0 in the playoffs so far? And no pun intended, a wild one in Game 1 against the Minnesota Wild, 9-6, which is an incredible hockey score, let alone in the playoffs. And I know you follow it closer than I do. How excited are you for Game 2 tonight as we do this podcast
Oh,
here
I'm
today?
I'm fired up. I don't expect it to be quite the barn burner we got in game one. Both these teams, I think, will tighten down defensively quite a bit. But it's been a lot of fun so far. We talked about it in our last episode. Even for casual fans, I couldn't encourage tuning into the Stanley Cup playoffs more. It's, in my opinion, it's the most intense form of professional sports competition that exists
Yeah.
right now. I mean, I just it's so exciting. Montreal and Tampa, another series, that just wrapped up in the first round. They played a game seven that was really exciting, but game six was 0-0 into overtime, and it was
Yeah.
it was one of the better, low scoring games I've seen in a while. So just some really great hockey overall. And the Avs, yeah, I mean, look, I've been very critical of them the last couple of years because they just quite frankly haven't had the team to do it again since the cup. And post deadline this year, they loaded up and they have the best team in the league. They just have to live up to expectations, and so far they've done that. And this is another great test tonight. Minnesota's going to throw the book at the wall because if you go back to Minnesota down 2-0 in this series, that's a really tough hill to climb up against this Avalanche team. So yeah, I can't
Yeah.
wait for it tonight. Really excited, and yeah, I hope everybody out there is enjoying the playoff action.
Yeah. And frankly, these two teams that play in Ball Arena have the best player in their sport on their roster, with Jokic and Nathan McKinnon, and two titles to show for it, which is good. But you kind of want more when you've got the best players in your sport, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that title for Jokic is hanging in the balance right now after just another really disappointing playoff performance by the
Yeah.
Nuggets. But yeah, look, I'm with you. For the Avs specifically, when you got Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar, who are two of the best, three players in the league, you've got to be able to get it over the finish line. And
Yeah.
quite frankly, outside of the year they won the cup, they haven't been out of the second round. So this is a really, really big one. It's all lining up for them, and yeah, I just can't wait for puck to drop.
Yeah. Well, and one last thing on hockey, because we're not here to talk hockey, but
Right.
there was a couple times last week that you're texting me late, like, dude, the game to tune into right now is Vegas and Utah, and
Right.
they played a couple of games. I think they were both back-to-back games, like 4-4 going into overtime, and
Yeah.
I believe Vegas won both of them. But
Yeah.
I wound up watching overtime. Because you're like, you got to tune into this, and
It's
you
just
know,
it's
I
fun.
I I agree with you. Playoff hockey is as bad as good of sports watching as there is,
Yeah.
but playoff overtime hockey
Yeah.
is like, that's another
Yeah.
level.
Yeah, it's just on the edge of your seat, right? I
Right,
mean,
right.
there's nothing more thrilling, in my opinion, in professional sports, and I love everything. So,
Yeah,
I think for me, it's the pinnacle of it. I
yeah,
maybe it's because, as far as just the culture of the game, like it's the ultimate team game, in my opinion. You've got to
yeah.
sacrifice everything. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome. Well, probably enough hockey talk for those that are tuning in to listen about the Buffaloes. Let's transition and give a shout out
We'll
to
put a
one.
timestamp on it. Don't worry.
Shout out to a former Buff. Shedeur Sanders was
Yeah.
back in Boulder this last weekend, and or earlier this week was it? I can't remember if it was weekend or Monday, whatever it was. But anyway, he got his degree, graduated, and you know. Great job for him, and coming back and well, not coming back. He probably finished online. I think he did everything online while he was here, which is that's common anyway. But
Yeah.
congratulations to him getting that degree. On the in the same weekend, Pete Brock, who left CU 50 years ago and went in the NFL, got his degree. So some players take a long time to come back and get it. Shedeur, he got it fairly quickly. I mean, his dad even took several years before he graduated, went back to
Yeah.
Talladega College. A lot of people don't know he actually graduated from Talladega. That's his actual alma mater. But Shedeur, congrats to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, credit to him for even doing it. Is he going to do anything with the degree? I'm not exactly sure, but
Yeah.
I think it's a cool accomplishment, certainly. I mean, it's never something that I was all that concerned about pushing through. So more power to him
Right.
to have gotten that done. And yeah, I mean, that whole college experience, his is different than a lot of people's just by nature of his celebrity and how being a student athlete in general. But I mean, those are good times, Brian. Those are good times.
And I
It
will say,
reminded me. It reminded me a lot of I was going through my. You always
yeah,
do when graduation comes around. You always kind of nostalgically look back, and it's like those times of going on the hill and sitting on on a porch in Pennsylvania Ave, and I mean, I don't know if your college experience was the same as mine.
no, it was
Yeah,
not. I graduated
yeah,
from Metro State in Denver.
yeah. That's right.
Uh,
Yeah,
but I will say one other thing on Shedeur is and I know people can criticize whatever they'll criticize everything, but like I know the Sanders, they film everything, but I thought it was cool watching the video of him interacting with all the other graduates, and he was just being a kid, and I loved it. I think he's 23, 22 or 23. He's about the same age as my oldest, and I thought it was just cool watching him interact with his peers, and having fun with that. And maybe he's doing some of that for the camera, but that's not Shedeur. I don't think so. I mean, that's just Shedeur, and
yeah.
I thought it was great watching him interact and really enjoy the moment, and not be Shedeur the celebrity. He was just Shedeur the college graduate. It was kind of cool.
Definitely was. And that's really who he is behind the
Yeah.
scenes. And if you've watched Well Off, you've understood that. But that's not just for the cameras. It's just kind of the person and teammate. Those are a lot of his teammates, or at least guys in the
Yeah.
program. What I did find very funny about the clip they posted is he definitely did not recognize Alejandro Mata at first.
Yeah.
And I related to that because at
Yeah.
Pro Day, Mata walked by. I was like, who? Oh, is that Mata? Because he cut his
Yeah.
hair and I think he put on, he's been lifting hard. So he definitely looks a little bit different. And I thought that was really funny because I had that same exact experience with Alejandro a couple of weeks ago.
Well, and especially in that setting when everybody's wearing the same thing,
Yeah,
right?
100%.
They're
Yeah.
all wearing a black cap and
Yeah.
gown. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah,
Hey, look, if you
it
can
was a cool moment.
graduate college and you can suffer through the whatever all the credits it takes to get your degree, more power to you. I'm envious because that was never anything. Once I got to college, I
Yeah.
realized this is just not for me. Like this path will never be for me
Yeah.
ever.
And listen,
So
he graduated from college quicker than I did, and I was
yeah,
not playing college football or
exactly,
NFL football while
exactly,
finishing up. So
right,
so
yeah,
congrats to him, and big moment for him and the Sanders family. So congrats to him. Let's move on to the current Buffs, because today, Matt, what we're going to talk about, actually, as we're, I don't know, 7, 8 minutes into this podcast, we'll talk about what we're actually going to talk about today, which
yeah,
is the offense. And we want to kind of just focus on the offense, kind of break down where they are. Spring ball ended last month, but kind of where they are going into the summer. And next week we're going to talk about more about the defense. But since we were talking Shedeur, let's transition and start with quarterback, because
sure.
that is the position. And obviously throughout the spring, Julian Lewis is he's the incumbent, I guess. He started 2 games there at the end of the season, before he sat the last one, to preserve the red shirt, which may not matter now. Anyway, Isaac Wilson comes in from Utah, and then you got Keneal Sweetwine. I think all three of them shined at times, made an impression at times, and I get the sense coming out of spring ball, there is no clear-cut starter.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like that. Publicly, Coach Prime has yet to fully endorse anybody, and that makes sense. You want to breed the competition, but maybe it's just holding Julian Lewis to a higher standard. But every time we've asked him about Julian, he's always said he's coming around the mountain. He'll be coming around the mountain when he comes, which to me is Coach Prime's way of saying jury's out. Like
He's not
jury's
there yet.
out. We're not sure. At least we're not there yet. That's a bare minimum. I think there's layers to it. I think number one,
Yeah.
it means at least we're not there yet, and I think number two, it's like okay, we'll see, because you have to remember, and this is no shot at Julian, but this is just what it with the situation. There are plenty of guys ranked very highly every year that just don't pan out, or for
Yeah.
whatever reason it doesn't work at their first destination, or what have you. And I'm not saying that's the case here, but I'm saying I think that we've kind of gotten over our skis a little bit as far as JuJu's future potential, because as I've said before, like this is an undersized guy, and not to mention he should still be in high school. So I think that it's very early to make any final determinations, but I also think in the same breath, it's still way too early to project any real confidence
Yeah.
in what he's going to be able to do. Now, is the talent there? Absolutely. I don't think anybody's going to argue with that. The arm talent's there. I think Brennan Marion was quoted saying he's got $1 million arm. But there's much more to playing quarterback than just
Mhm.
just arm talent. So I think that's a factor. And the other factor in this, I think, is that look, Coach Prime, as I asked him about Isaac Wilson in the spring, he didn't bring in Isaac Wilson to just be here. Like he brought
Right,
in Isaac Wilson to compete. Isaac Wilson's a guy who's had experience and clearly has a very intriguing, you know, lineage, football lineage coming from.
right,
So I do believe, based upon the spring game, there isn't a huge gap between the two. As we talked about, I think from a consistency standpoint, given a clean pocket, I do believe Julian's a better passer. Now, that's just the passing. Are we talking about the processing, the offense, all of that, is a factor here because there's a part of me where I'm watching the spring game and, I thought Jules was much more poised for sure, but he's also looking over to the sideline constantly,
right,
constantly waiting for hand signals. The one thing Isaac Wilson was clearly ahead of him in that regard is just the operation. He was much more comfortable calling an offense out at the line. I think they were able to go faster with Isaac Wilson. Now, he's got to be more consistent, right? Like there's plenty of opportunities, and we can go through his film that he's put on tape where he's put the ball in harm's way. That's the
right.
quickest way to find yourself on the bench is
Mhm.
turning the football over. He can't do that. And clearly, I think that Isaac is just a more mature person at the moment in time simply
Mhm.
because of age. And he has the ability right now to run the operation a little bit smoother. Now, is that going to change? What does it look like as more of the offense gets installed? And, I respect Sweetwine. I think he's one of the better looking true freshmen that they've had in the program in a little while at the quarterback position. But I'm just not going to take him seriously right now in this. Although, to be honest, he and Jules are the same age, other than the fact that Julian has a couple more starts. So maybe he should be more seriously considered in this competition, right? Like, what is the difference there? I mean, truthfully, Julian's been in college for at least a year, but it's a brand new system. They're both starting, essentially in the go-go from square one. So maybe he is more a part of it. I still think that it's Julian's job to lose because talk is cheap, but not playing the highest paid NIL guy on your team would be surprising to me. I mean, Coach Prime has been consistent in playing the best player available at that position. He's played
Yeah,
walk-ons before. He's played true freshman when he's needed to. However, that takes some stones to be
yeah,
able to say, hey, and you know what else it says? Maybe we screwed up a little bit in our evaluation if this guy isn't ready.
right.
Why couldn't we get him ready? Or is Isaac just so much better? So it's a very open at the moment, and I think much more than fans believe, just based upon what we've been able to see, which is very little.
Yeah, and I will say this: we have not seen as much, but I've talked to people in the building that were at every practice that believe Isaac had a better spring, and
Yeah.
so it might be Julian's to lose, but he might be losing it. I don't know. I mean, there is belief in that building by some that Isaac had a better spring, and there's also a lot of belief in Brennan Marion that you know the with the offense that he has, he'll make it work with whichever quarterback. And so I think there's a lot more. I get a sense there's a lot more faith in Brennan Marion than there is in the actual quarterbacks at this point in time. Not that they don't think those guys can play, but that's how much they are trusting the offense of Brennan Marion and believe in him. That whichever one is ready to play, Brennan Marion will make it work. And I don't know who it'll be at this point. I think it's very wide open. And I like your point about Keneal Sweetwine because at this point last year, who were we writing off? Ryan Staub, and who wound up starting a game last year and at times looking pretty good was Ryan Staub. So, if neither one of those guys steps up, maybe Keneal Sweetwine gets a shot. But I do think going into fall, Matt, it's very wide open for that quarterback spot, and I think it might be Julian's to lose. I think it's Isaac's to go win as well, and I think that I think it's a coin toss right now as to who's actually the starter when they go to Atlanta.
Yeah, and I imagine some fans probably won't want to hear that just because there's been, big buildup for Julian Lewis, and
Yeah,
I understand that as well. However, I would just say there are things that Isaac brings to the table that Julian doesn't. Size, I believe he's faster and more agile. And I think the quarterback run can help them in this go-go offense. And I like one of
Mhm.
the things you said there, wherever you're hearing that from, I feel to, share that same sentiment that I'm a little bit more confident in the offensive philosophy this year than I am with the actual signal callers,
Yeah.
which is a really good thing because that
Mhm.
that should at least minimize some of your exposure if you're not as confident in the
Right.
quarterback position as you'd like to be. Hopefully you can scheme around that. You can maybe hide some deficiencies, some weaknesses. And Brian, I'll also bring it back to this. We've been saying it since Coach Prime's gotten here. If you get a real running game, you take so much pressure
Mhm.
off your quarterbacks, which with
Yeah.
Shedeur, I mean, it would have been really nice to be able to do that. But now it's almost a necessity, right? And in the past where they've had to win in spite of their line, they're going to have to win because of it, I think, moving forward in this program, just by
Yeah.
nature of what college football is now, unless you can find some real difference makers.
One last thing on Brennan Marion. Keep in mind he was at UNLV a couple years ago, and I can't remember the kid's name, but remember they're off to a great start in September, and their quarterback has an NIL dispute and quits the team.
Sluka or
Yeah, that's
Siuka?
right. Matt
Matthew.
Matt
Yeah.
Matt Sluka, I believe. They're
Yeah.
off to a great start. He's a throwing quarterback.
Yeah.
They're off to a great start. He basically quits the team over an NIL dispute. They kept winning. Brendan
Yeah.
Marion put in the backup, and the offense changed. They kept winning, so he made it work. So, we'll see what he does with that. And that's a good transition to the run game, and we'll get to the offensive line in a little bit. But the run game, how do you feel with the running backs coming out of spring ball at this point?
Better than I have at any point in the Coach Prime tenure thus far, in
Yeah.
my opinion, as
Mhm.
far as just the overall depth in the room, the talent in the room. I think Damian Henderson probably has shown the most so far, and that was reflected in carries because the one thing that we really haven't seen from, Colorado under Coach Prime is a healthy running back room in a spring
Mhm.
game. And this year, that was the opposite of the case. Everybody
Yeah.
played. So I'm looking forward to seeing that room develop. They have a lot more weapons. I think a lot of guys are going to play. Like,
Mhm.
I just think even if Micah Welch finds his way down at the bottom of the depth chart, which I think is a possibility, right? Like they haven't had a choice in the last couple of years because they just haven't had like really physical backs.
Yeah.
Richard Young is that. Micah Welch is going to have to beat out Richard Young. Now, I think there are some opportunities where you've got a smaller guy, you can hide him a little bit behind the offensive line. Like there's definitely some real opportunity to get Micah Welch involved, but he will have to do more with his carries this year to justify as many
Right.
as he's had the first 2 years, in my opinion. So, not to mention, I'm not sure that you could create in a lab a better running back for this system than DeKalen Taylor, which is one thing that we've been very consistent with. I think that guy's like a little Swiss Army knife for you.
Mhm.
So provided he can stay healthy, we saw what he was able to do as a receiver. I mean, he had 4 touchdowns in what, like the first 3 weeks last year?
Yeah.
Maybe that was, yeah, I
Yeah.
think that was it. So
More
it,
receiving yards than rushing yards.
I
Yeah.
really think Brennan Marion's going to find a way to take advantage of him. The one thing we know about this offense is all over is they have real speed. They may
Yeah.
not be physically imposing, but they have real speed.
Yeah.
So if you
Mhm.
can just find a way to get these guys a football with a little bit of space to do something and a head of steam, it should be much more explosive than the last couple of years. And I expect the Kalen Taylor to be a heavy factor in that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Michael Welch, I've always liked him. I loved his high school film. I think he's got a lot of potential to be a pretty good running back, but he's now a junior. He did lead this team in rushing last year, so you have to consider him. I thought he had the worst spring game of those guys. He didn't, but some of that is. He only got a couple plays. It's not like we're
Yep.
basing this on 20 carries, but he ran the ball a couple times. Maybe the blocking wasn't there, but I think it was 0 yards or -1, something like that. But he's capable. Richard Young's capable. I really like Damian Henderson. I think he's going to be a really good player. And if I had to pick right now, I mean, Jaquel Smith too is a guy that
Yeah.
rushed for over 500 yards last year for Marion at Sacramento State, as did Damian Henderson. But if I had to pick right now, Matt, they throw two running backs out there in the starting lineup. I would say DeKalen Taylor and Damian Henderson.
And remind me, it's Cam Newton, right? Who's the
Yep.
incoming
Mhm.
true freshman. And there's one more. Who are we missing?
Uh, that's it. There's the
It's
six guys.
Jaquale and Cam.
Jaquale, yeah. So there's six guys on scholarship, and then you got four walk-ons. That
Okay.
I mean, one of them is Bryce Hicks, who actually had
That's
some
who I
nice
was
run.
thinking of.
Yeah,
That's who I was thinking of. That he's
yeah,
their best looking walk on. I think we've
yeah,
seen. I mean, no disrespect to Charlie Offerdahl, but I
yeah,
think as far as like actual potential to maybe contribute,
mhm,
in a real way, I think he could. Well, that's who I was talking about.
yeah.
They've got depth there that they haven't had before. So
Right.
again, you're probably going to have two backs on the field almost every play. I imagine they'll mix it up a little bit, but that's how this offense is supposed to work. So you're kind of doubling your exposure there at that position. So you did need added depth in case you incur more injuries. And I think they're a little bit more insulated for that this year. Hopefully we don't really see that because I'd love to see a fully healthy year from a Colorado backfield under Coach Prime and a
Yeah,
productive one more than
yeah,
anything. That's really what I'd love to see.
yeah. Me too. And moving on to receiver. Interesting spring because I think two of the guys that are going to be among their best were not participating in spring. DeAndre Moore, the transfer from Texas, and then
Yeah.
Joseph Williams, who was obviously the Buffs' number two receiver last year, were both
And
out with
Hakeem.
injuries. Yeah, Hakeem was not there as well. Those are three guys I think are going to be involved in this offense, and none of them. Well, Hakeem participated early in spring and then got hurt, but the other two not at all in spring. But what we learned is, look, Danny Scudero is a leader in that room. He's going to be one of their top guys,
Yep.
and even when I think it was Marion was asked, how do you handle a guy like that that's used to getting a lot of targets and may not get so many, and he's like, well, he's going to get a lot of targets. So they
Yeah.
like him a lot. Cam Perry, Ernest Campbell is a kid that is running track, but he had a big year for Marion last year at Sac State. uh Quentin Gibson, Quanell Farrakhan. I think there's really good depth. There's a lot of guys on this team that outsiders don't really know about, but I think it's a good receiver room.
The way Quentin Gibson appeared to me during the spring game is one of those guys that I would manufacture more opportunities for just
Hmm.
because we know what he can do, right? We know his athleticism, but it felt to me, and I don't know if you felt the same way, but it looked like he grew up a little bit at the spring game, just matured a little bit more. And by nature of some of those other guys being out, I'm sure he had more opportunities than he would have otherwise.
Yeah.
That's one guy though that maybe you just keep, give him that little bit of an extra push
Yep.
because if you can find a way to help him blossom, and not that you don't with any of these other guys, that's not what we're saying, but that's a guy that you just know there's real potential there. And
Mhm.
so when we're talking about some of these other names, obviously he was forced into action a little bit more last year than they probably would have liked just due to some of, the idiosyncrasies of the, 2025 season. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing what this group can do. Tons of speed, big bodies, I think a little bit of a short supply. However, Hakeem's there, and they're going to use the tight end much more in this offense as a
Right.
receiver.
Hmm.
Excuse me, which I think makes a big difference. Blocking everything, keeping defenses on their heels. We've been begging for this for a couple years. Make the defense guess at the line of scrimmage, and the lack of utilization of the tight end the last couple of years has really hurt them. And it's
Yep.
not just because they didn't utilize it; they didn't have a lot of those guys. I think that room is much better constructed now. So, in the same breath that we're talking about receivers, I think it's important because and it's not just the receivers out there. There's going to be plenty, as we mentioned, plenty of receptions to running backs as well.
Yep.
So
Hmm.
tons of weapons to spread the ball around to. In that regard, a lot of this will come down to scheme and quarterback play, right? Like I think you're going to see a raised floor based upon the offense that Colorado will bring to the table this year as opposed to any of the years that Coach Prime has been here so far. And beyond that, it's much the same as we saw last year. Look, quarterback's the most important position in football, so you've got to have
Yeah.
guys like that who can produce.
Yeah. And who would you guess are the leading receivers on this team? And I mean wide receivers, not necessarily. I mean, you could throw DeKalen could be one of the top receivers, but as far as wide receivers, who would you guess leads this team? And obviously we're saying all health, everybody's healthy and all
Yeah.
that, but who would you guess are the top two, three targets on this team?
Danny and JoJo right now seem to be, in my opinion, I think the guys who I would expect the biggest years from. Beyond
Yeah.
that, I'm looking forward to seeing who else steps up. Everybody raves about DeAndre Moore. Let's see what it looks like, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, I feel like as touted as he's been and he's been productive, you've got to do it at your new school.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yep.
there's so many guys that hit the portal and just don't do it at their new school. Sure, some of them do, and I believe he will because he's been talked about as a leader, as a guy who has approached everything the right way through injury, and I'm not doubting him in that regard, but he has a lot of competition as well. So I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to seeing him earn that playing time.
Yeah, he's also a Brennan Marion guy that
100%.
Marion coached at Texas and brought here. So, yeah, those are the three I look at. I think Cam Perry obviously is going to have a role in this. Ernest Campbell, and I agree with you on Quentin Gibson. I think that's where, and this is a whole other thing, but like I expect him to be a returner. Because they're going to want to
Oh,
find
of
ways to get the
course.
ball in his hands. So,
Yeah.
yeah, those guys are exciting. The Ward brothers are in there as well. Jacob Swain's coming in this summer. So there's some young, talented freshmen receivers, but I don't expect them to be big parts of the offense yet this year. I think those other guys we talked about are going to be a bigger deal. You mentioned tight ends. I agree with you, Zach Atkins. I think this will be his biggest year as far as receptions in college, and he hasn't had a lot of big years, but I think he's going to be
Right.
a big part of this offense. And then Fisher Clements, Brady Kopetz are guys that probably more of the blocking type of tight ends, but I agree with you. They got more guys in there that like you look at them and say, yeah, that's a tight end, right? If they were to walk by us at the Champion Center, you'd say, yep, that's a tight end. There
Mhm.
weren't a lot of those guys before,
No, I mean, the first year it was Mikey Harrison,
right?
and he was
Who was a
lonely in that
receiver?
club, right?
Yeah,
Converted walk-on
yeah,
receiver,
yeah,
absolutely. So yes, they certainly have come a long ways. There's a long way left to go,
yeah.
certainly at that position, but they're going to be able to do a lot more, hopefully, with this offense. The one thing they don't really have are those H back guys, which I still think they need, and they didn't find any of those. Those are really the guys, in my opinion, who unlock the deception, the difference between the run action and the play action, and all those different things that you want to do to get creative in the backfield. Just think back to, think over to what Kansas likes to do. They got a lot of those guys who are kind of tweener back tight end guys, but man, they're a hell of a blocker on the edge, right? Like this is going to be a critical element, I think, to Brendan Marion's offense this year is how well do those guys block? Because
Yeah.
if there's one thing that we saw a little bit at the spring game, it was getting two tight ends out on the edge and really getting them. You're going to see some unbalanced formations, and that's where your tight ends, and they're kind of an extension of your offensive line a little bit in that regard.
Mhm.
So that's going to be huge. I mean, can Josh Niblett get those guys to block consistently at a high level? I mean, they certainly all love playing for him. I mean, he brings
Yeah.
an incredible passion to the game. So,
And it's incredible, Matt. This goes well beyond Coach Prime's tenure. But for years, we've been watching like all these other college teams have guys like that. It's like, why does Colorado never
I
get
know
that guy?
they did. They had Brady Russell,
They have Brady Russell,
and he's a Super Bowl
yeah.
champion now,
But
right?
really,
So,
aside from Brady Russell in the last
yeah,
decade,
no,
I think it was Sean Irwin in 2016 was solid in that regard. They didn't throw the ball a lot to him, but he was a good blocker. But that's what one or two guys
yeah,
we're talking about in a decade or so. And I mean, you got Stanford in its heyday, like just had a stockpile of those guys, and so
yep.
we've been waiting for Colorado to get somebody like that. So offensive line, you mentioned it early that that's gonna be a key to this. I think it's hard to judge the offensive line right now. I mean,
Yeah.
spring ball is hard to judge. Plus, when they're splitting the teams like they did, I mean, there's half your projected starters were playing on the black team and half were playing on the gold team. So it's really hard to know what's what. But what we do know, Matt, is that it's going to be a totally revamped line, right? There's a lot of guys from last year that are not here anymore, including some kid named Jordan that is now in Baton Rouge. That's a big loss. So when Jordan Seaton's not here, so you're having to replace a lot of people. But what are your impressions of this offensive line as you watch spring?
We'll see. I'm not sure. The whole point of this scheme, as I understand it, right, is to take lesser players and give them a better chance of success, more or less. I'm paraphrasing, right? But I think that's a part of it with this offensive line. The stuff that they do, as I understand it, it's a little bit more simplistic and a
Mhm.
little bit kind of toned down as far as the rhetoric you're assigned. Like you've got a handful of things that you have to know how to do, and as long
Yeah.
as you know those, you're gonna be okay, and you don't miss assignments. But a big part of it is communication. So leadership is huge. Yaya Atia seems to be a guy that's kind of taken that mantle, but again, his real first opportunity at being an every down guy. Now he's done that obviously in stretches, but I'm talking about somebody that you're really relying on over the
For
course
12
of the
games.
season.
Yeah.
100%.
Hmm.
And that's a big one because outside of that, you've got some new names and some new faces, and sure, you got Philip Houston and Larry Johnson in there, and some guys that have contributed in the past, right? There's no doubt about that. What does it look like this year? I really don't know. Demetrius Hunter,
Hmm.
I think, is a big get
Hmm.
because Zarian
Yeah.
McGill was probably, I don't know, was he maybe their second best lineman last year consistently behind Seaton, or maybe it
Consistent, at
was,
least at least most consistent. Yeah, I think
yeah,
it was Jordan and him, and you could argue him because Seaton didn't play the last 3 games.
that's very true. And considering the expectations we had for him coming in, he surpassed them, no
Yeah.
question.
Hmm.
So big shoes to fill in a regard there for what I would expect it's going to be Demetrius Hunter just based
Yeah.
upon the way they've talked about him so far. So, especially because he's got that experience, really big for them to pick him up, right? I mean, that's a guy who is an experienced center. I would be
Hmm.
curious to know what his offer list was like completely because
Right.
with all those snaps under your belt, you figure you get targeted. Now, he's obviously not, I think was Zarian bigger than him? I think he might be a
Feels like
little
it.
bit more
Taller,
undersized. Yeah, taller for
taller.
sure.
I'm trying to think, where is he? Hunter's 6'2". I don't think he's totally 6'2". I feel
Yeah,
like Zarian was taller.
a little
He's
bit.
310 though. I mean, they're probably
Yeah.
similar. But
I was just
look,
trying to think of what detractors could have been, as
yeah,
opposed to why some of the, top teams didn't get them. It appears on paper like that's a really good pickup for them.
yeah, and 2-year starter at Houston, and obviously a Houston team that last year was sort of resurgent. What they finished 9-4, something like that,
Yeah.
8-5.
Yeah.
So, a good pickup there. Atia Chauncey Gooden, I think, has got a lot of
Yeah.
potential at guard, but there's a lot of competition there. You mentioned, Philip Houston, and Larry Johnson that have been starting tackles here, right tackles here, the last couple of years that were really playing a lot of guard this spring. You got Jose Soto, who came over from Sac State, was Brendan Marion's one of his starting guards last year. So you have all those guys competing, and then at tackle you got a bunch of guys that brought in that there's no Jordan Seaton, but there's guys that did play and pick up starts at their previous schools and Power Five schools. So
Yep.
Leon Bell at Cal, looking at the list here. Javon Richardson had a couple starts at Missouri.
Bo.
Uh, Taj White, what's that?
Bo.
Oh yeah, Bo Hewley from Georgia had a couple starts there. Taj White at Rutgers. So you've got guys that have made starts, and then Javon McFadden. I think he's more of a guard, but that's Jordan Seaton's cousin. Comes in from
Yeah.
Ohio State, so there's a lot of experience and like Power Four experience that's coming in here. Where it all fits, I don't know. I don't really know where I'd project the tackles at this point. Um, I think the one offensive line spot that I feel confident projecting is Demetrius Hunter at center.
Yeah, and I would say Atia at left guard. I'd be pretty surprised if somebody beats him out there, unless Gooden, plays left guard. But I thought he was more of a right guard, so I'm not exactly
Yeah,
sure what that looks like. But I would imagine right now you've got Atia and Hunter probably penciled in up front. At least I do. And then beyond that, and then maybe Gooden, because it sounds like a lot of guys they've been pumping his tires quite heavy. So
yeah.
maybe that's your interior offensive line. Beyond that, I do think it's more of an open competition. Sounds like Bo's got the inside track for left tackle at the moment in time. Maybe that could change. Who knows? The one thing about Jordan Seaton that I have a feeling we're going to remember this year is how nice it is to have that left tackle actually solidified with a guy you really don't have to
Right.
worry about.
Yeah,
For so many years, that's not been the case here.
yeah.
And it feels like we could be headed back down that route, which is probably to be expected because, left tackles that you don't have to worry about in college football are not a dime a dozen, and they
Mhm.
certainly have not been commonplace around Colorado. So do we end up seeing more of a rotation this year? I think it's possible. I definitely do. But again, time will tell. Not a position I'm gonna project too much on because, quite frankly, I think I have real questions about CU's interior defensive line in a lot of places, and that's just not great competition to go up against to really callous yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious to see what it looks like.
Yeah, I am too. And another guy we haven't mentioned his name at all, but we should is Sean Kinney, who's that backup center. He's got a ton of experience. I know it was at Lafayette, which is a D2 school, but I think he's one of those guys that could play a guard or center role. I think he's going to be a factor at some point too. But to your point, there's a lot of names we just mentioned there, and I think we could see most or all those guys at some point this year. I think there could be some rotation, and Leon Bell. I would agree with you. Probably Leon Bell and Bo Hewley would be the projected tackles at this point. Yaya and Chauncey probably at guard, and then Demetrius Hunter at center. But again, you got Houston, you got Larry Johnson, who started I think 11 games last year. So yeah, this group is it's coming together. So we'll see.
Yeah, we will see. We will.
So
And look, I think offensively overall, the last thing I'll say is, as we said in our spring game recap, I'm very encouraged and came away very encouraged with what their scheme's going to be.
yeah,
It's all going to be about, can you first of all get talent, second of all retain, well, second of all develop talent, third of all retain talent, right? And
yeah,
I think that they've certainly demonstrated that they've been able to do that. I don't know if I'd say overall, but definitely in some significant cases, right? And
yeah,
as they've said, like there's been plenty of players that have left to go on to bigger schools, and certainly they were put on the map at Colorado. So let's not completely take away. I'm not trying to make it sound like that either. They've definitely developed some guys, but overall, I think when you're talking about bringing up lower level players, it's as they know from being in at the HBCU level that you just have to develop guys,
yeah,
like to really bring a Cam Silman Craig, onto a Power Four field where he can be a legitimate difference maker. That took a lot of development along the
right,
route. So
yeah.
they know that they've had experience doing it, and they're gonna have to do it again.
Yeah. And overall, I would say this. I think this is an offense that the jury's out in a lot of cases, but I feel very confident it's going to be better than last year's, which isn't going to be super hard. But
Yeah.
Brandon Marion's typically had 30-point per game offenses. The one exception was William and Mary when they were much better than the year before he got there. I think this is a team that can score 30 points a game, but they got to figure out the trigger man, and I got to figure out that offensive line. They got a summer to do that, and so look forward to seeing it in the fall. And Matt, we'll be back next week. We'll break down the defense a little bit.
All right, buddy.